Noguchi rode slightly behind Hiroki through the mid-afternoon light, their hoverbike setting up whirls of baked tan dust and hot pebbles in their wake. Earlier they had skimmed the inner ridges of the gorge and then circled back to town for a light lunch. Now they were headed out again, towards Bariki Canyon, one of the primary runs for the majority of the herds. Noguchi had spent most of the morning getting used to the flyer's controls. Fortunately, they weren't too hard to figure out. Stop, go, height and speed adjustments. The trick was to watch for obstacles that might cause problems. Jump a big rock too fast and you could find yourself on your back, your scooter flying merrily along without you, at least until the dead hand control shut it down. Besides basic instructions and a few landscape remarks throughout the concepts, Hiroki had kept quiet during their ride. It was the longest she'd spent outdoors since arriving on Ryushi. The heat was incredible, the rays from the two suns slapping at them with tangible force. Fiery winds ruffled the tips of her black hair at the base of her visor, and particles of sandy dirt kicked up by Hiroki's bike pelted her goggles and dusted her cheeks. Ahead and all around, huge cliffs encircled them. Initially it had all looked the same, harsh and unforgiving, but she had to admit there was a sparse beauty to the plains as well. It recalled images of sand gardens that Noguchi had visited in her youth at Kyoto. Here, the sand was unchanneled and pocked with planets and rocks. Knee-high stands of beige reeds grew randomly near the edges of the valley. Stones jutted from the earth in layers of shaded browns and greys. The fractured topsoil was a huge jigsaw puzzle with no end. There was plenty of sand, to be sure, but no order here, no simple Zen lines. It was raw chaos. Billions of years in the making, this world, and she and a handful of men and women now held sway over it, masters of all the dry land. It was not hard to believe in manifest destiny out here in the far reaches of the galaxy, that mankind's true role was to minister to and control all things. Their revving motors had surprised a goodly number of small animals out of hiding. A family of jack lizards hopped in front of Noguchi's bike near the gorge, headed for cover in the grasses, and Hiroki had pointed out an armoured firewalker and her mate as they slipped through a pile of rocks earlier in the morning. The female was a rosy brown, her smaller mate a faded grey. They had been poking at gravel with their short, pointed snouts, probably searching for snake eggs or beetles. Noguchi could understand, at least intellectually, why the ranchers had left Earth to make Ryushi their home. There was a kind of freedom to the prairies, a calm serenity to the stark lands, a certain beauty in it all. On Earth, a single living plex could house 50,000 people in tight, tiny cubicles. On Earth, open land still existed, but under so many regulations that just to walk upon it without a proper license might be worth a year in prison. Nowhere on the homeworld was there such vast emptiness as was all around her here. She found herself even enjoying the weather as they neared the southern end of Bariki Canyon, the simplicity of a dry wind in her face. She wondered if it was too late for this new understanding to change her standing with the ranchers. Perhaps with time. "We're coming up on one of Ackland's camps," Hiroki crackled in her ear. "Right." She slowed as they rounded a bend in the gully. There were several dozen rinth grazing on weeds a couple of 100 meters ahead, and beyond, the large treaded vehicle that Ackland used to check on his herds. The crawler could hold 20 people comfortably, and was equipped with a full kitchen and sleeping accommodations for at least 6. Most of the ranchers had automatic vehicles, AVs, but Ackland's was the biggest. Of course. The rinth themselves seemed to be unlikely meat animals. They looked to Noguchi much like a beast she had seen in a zoo as a child, a rhinoceros. The rinth were slightly bigger than her memory of the grey-brown Terran creature, and they had a mottled purple and ochre skin. They walked on stumpy, oddly jointed legs that ended in nailed pads, and they had a hooked, beak-like mouth, above which were a pair of inline horns. The greater horn, a wrist-thick and sharp cone that jutted straight up in front. The lesser horn, smaller, and angled slightly backward towards the animal's rear. Ugly brutes, no brighter than cattle, but very tasty when cooked properly. Noguchi came to a stop next to Hiroki's bike and dismounted, legs still throbbing with the feel of the engine. Ackland and several of his people stood grouped near the AV and watched them approach. Noguchi set her eye protectors up on her cap and patted dust from her clothing as they neared Ackland. The big man gazed at them with a sneer. "What's the problem, Hiroki? You and the boss lady get lost." "We're just making the rounds," began Hiroki. "Yeah, right," Ackland grinned without humour. "What's the real reason? The company shoot down the price increase?" Noguchi cleared her throat. "You know we can't get through the magnetic interference during the day. I'll contact them this evening." Ackland scoffed and started to turn away. "And," she continued, "I'll do all I can to get you a bigger cut." She wouldn't be talking to Earth, of course. The newly invented subspace radio wouldn't stretch that far, but she could get a response from the corporate sub-HQ on Kajita's world. Even though it was light years away, the new equipment could shrink that to a few light hours, effectively only a few billion kilometers. They could get an answer by morning, and the sub-HQ was empowered to make such niggling decisions. Ackland raised an eyebrow. "So what are you doing out here?" He made no effort to keep irritation out of his voice. Hiroki remained silent. "We're checking on everyone's progress, seeing if there's anything we can do to help," she said. The late afternoon light glinted off of the AV's pitted hull behind him as Ackland looked her up and down. Finally, he nodded. "Yeah, you can help. You can stay out of our way. The last thing we need is help from corporate paper pushers." He faced the young woman next to him and pointed to the shaded monitor built into the AV. "Roth, take some of the boys and run these 3 gullies. Drive them down into the canyon and hook up with Cho's group." Roth nodded and motioned to 2 of the men in Ackland's company. Ackland presented his back to Noguchi and Hiroki and punched at the control set into the monitor's rim. Apparently, they had been dismissed. They walked back to their bikes slowly. Hiroki placed a hand on her forearm gently as they reached the flyers. "I'm sorry about the way Ackland treated you," he said. Noguchi shrugged. "Actually, it's okay. I know how..." She paused, searched for the right word. "I know what kind of an uncaring bitch I've been. I would have been surprised if he'd any other reaction. It's as if I've been in some kind of suspended animation for the last few months. I cannot explain it." She pulled her visor down firmly and looked toward Prosperity Wells, about to say something else, except all thoughts disappeared. "Wow," she whispered. "What?" Hiroki looked past her. "Oh yes, you haven't got out much since you arrived, have you?" Noguchi barely heard him. The suns were setting. The desert was bathed now in golds and reds. Long shadows stretched from the mountains towards them, and in the cloudless sky, the arrangement of shade and light left her breathless. It was actually the first time she'd ever seen the sunset outside. Her mind couldn't pair the stunning sight with the thought she'd had of Ryushi for the past 6 months. She would have to let one or the other go. Ryushi was, in its way, a beautiful place, at least here, and in this moment it was. Noguchi sighed and watched the sunset, Hiroki quiet beside her. When they finally mounted their bikes to head home, she felt as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders, one she had not been aware of until it was gone. Tom scanned the console and spoke without looking up. "Geosync orbit in 20 hours and check on turbulence?" Scott's hands fluttered over the controls. "Some fluctuation, but we can compensate no prob. We can decouple any time after orbit is achieved, and then it's..." The magnified Ryushi holo had appeared on the screen. "Hello, Ryushi." Jesus, what a dustball. Tom looked up and nodded. "So it's a tad dry. Big deal." Scott leaned back in his form chair and cracked his knuckles behind his head. "Yeah, but we're not talking about vague thirst here. This is just one big, parched hellhole." He watched the vid as it panned the ranges and cliffs of Ryushi. What kind of mouth breeder would even want to move way the fuck out here, especially when there's still plenty of land available on Nova Terra? Tom glanced at the screen and then went back to plugging in data. Who the hell knows? One man's poison and all that. Yeah, but look at the readouts of the native life. This place is poison. I'm sure Ryushi is the perfect home for somebody, somewhere. Not me, Scott mumbled under his breath. Great place for a nice vacation from the tug, sure. If you were a fucking lizard. Oh well. He could spend his time in the local bar talking to the women. He didn't have to go hiking around in the sunshine now, did he? The Chunde studied the file picture of the desert world less than half a cycle away. Behind him, the Ouchers sparred under Skemte's supervision and screamed in bloodlust. Soon they would have real targets. He watched the Gikin Mara record and hissed in anticipation. Perfect.